It's the Ross Tucker Football Podcast.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It is a teaching tutorial Thursday. It's presented by DraftKings. Thursday means it's a Greg Cosell day. The NFL Films legend, 44 years. I call him the civilian GOAT. It is a term of endearment, and I call him that because I truly believe out of all of the people in the world that have never worked for a team, meaning a coach or a player or a front office, I don't know anyone that's better at watching the tape and breaking it down than Greg. Certainly someone that didn't, I don't even know if he played high school football. I got to ask him, but he definitely didn't play college football. He played college basketball, but he loves it. He loves the football. So do you guys. That's why you tune in each and every day. Reminder, this is the last episode this week. There won't be any Tux takes because I'm traveling with my family right now, but we will get to any of the news that goes on these next couple days early next week when I return, and we still have brand new, fresh, Even Money podcast, Fantasy Feast podcast, College Draft podcast. Obviously, we already had 2 Ross Tucker football podcasts this week, so we are loaded up. Speaking of the Fantasy Feast, I love going against you guys, the listeners, in a best ball draft, and I love what West Shore Home did to our 2 upstairs bathrooms. If you haven't looked at it yet, why not? Go check it out. Just go to westshorehome.com/Ross. They have pictures and videos before and after of the work that they did at our house. Look, do you think I would just let anybody come into my house? Well, forget me. Do you think my wife would just let anybody come into our house and do work? Absolutely not. They are a company that started locally, and they have a fantastic reputation. Now they have like 40 branches, I think, all over the country, including probably one near you. So go to westshorehome.com/Ross. Get the free estimate. Why not? You don't need to get the replacement now or redo your bathroom now, but just get an idea of how much it would cost if you want to do that down the line, or now if you're ready for it. And then send me that scheduled free estimate or whatever, ross@rosstucker.com, and get in the next best ball draft with me and Joe here in July. westshorehome.com/Ross. That's westshorehome.com/Ross. It's Big Show time.
The Big Show.
All right, Greg, I'm a little bit sad to wrap up this series. It's been so well received. We've done so well on YouTube, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. Although I guess that's the beauty of these shows is people will keep watching or listening to these all the way up until the season starts. Last but not least, we have the NFC West. And let's start with the Arizona Cardinals, Greg. Fascinating team in that they had just given Keim and Kingsbury these extensions, and those guys are done after a year. And this very much feels like a team in transition.
Yeah, it does, particularly with Kyler Murray. We don't know when he will be ready to play, given that he's coming off an ACL. Their number 2 quarterback is Colt McCoy. They did draft Clayton Tune from Houston in the 5th round. You would have to assume it would be Colt McCoy. So, new coach and Jonathan Gannon, the former Eagles defensive coordinator. I don't know if we have a great feel for what this offense is going to look like early on. Obviously, we know that Colt McCoy is not the kind of quarterback that by choice you want to drop back 40 or 45 times. So you would assume that this will be a little bit of that old school approach. Try to run the ball, slow the game down, play with some pace and some tempo. And since Jonathan Gannon is obviously a defensive coach, as the head coach, really try to build a defense that can keep you in games. And he'll have to scheme to do that, because if you just look at the roster of players, you don't really see any special players that you say, wow, those are dominant, high-impact players on the defensive side. So you will see a lot of scheming by Jonathan Gannon on the defensive side of the ball.
So what's interesting to me, Greg, is there's a perception that the Cardinals are really rebuilding. A lot of draft picks for 2024, that they'll be a bad team. A lot of people believe they're going to take Caleb Williams, number 1 overall in the draft next year, and kind of restart at the quarterback. I don't know how much you've watched Caleb, but I know you can certainly comment on Kyler Murray and what you've seen from him in his career so far.
Yeah, and I think Kyler Murray's a talented kid. Obviously, he throws the ball exceptionally well. Obviously, he can make special plays with his legs. There's so much going on with Kyler Murray that we don't know about, that you hear, and those are things that it's just, unless you're there, you don't know. But he is a talented quarterback. He's had good moments in this league. I think that if they had a chance to draft Caleb Williams, they probably would. Don't forget, you have a brand new coaching staff that's coming in now, and they'll make their own evaluations of players. Kyler Murray, they signed him to a big deal. I don't know the ramifications of that, as far as, hey, if you wanted to get rid of him, what the cap number is. But I would think, especially depending on when Kyler Murray can play this year, if he comes, let's say he comes in and plays really, really well, which is theoretically possible. He's capable of that. Does that change their thinking? We don't know the answer to that. This is kind of an experimental year for the Arizona Cardinals in many ways.
Well, I guess that would probably be ideal, right? If Kyler comes in midway through the year, plays well, but they still have the first or second pick, and they can do what the Bears did and get a king's ransom for it, but still feel pretty good about who their quarterback is.
I mean, in an ideal world, that would be great for them, because you're going to have 2 quarterbacks who I've seen, both guys from their 2022 tape, and Caleb Williams and Drake May, who are clearly going to be seen as worthy of number 1 picks in a draft. So, yes, that would be the ideal situation for them. Obviously, Jonathan Gannon and the offensive staff have studied Kyler Murray in detail. And until you're with a guy every day, you don't know. But they've studied his tape in detail. They'll have their opinions about him. They're not going to share that publicly. But I think it's imperative for Kyler Murray to try to get back as quickly as he can.
Let's move on to the teams we think will be a little bit more competitive, like the San Francisco 49ers. Speaking of quarterback situations, Greg, they pretty clearly have one. I find it fascinating that a year ago, Trey Lance was the unquestioned starter. Garoppolo's working on a side field. And then Lance gets hurt in week 2. And Greg, you hear the Niners talk. It's like Brock Purdy's everything we wanted. Sam Darnold looks amazing. And yeah, Trey Lance on the team too. I mean, it really feels like he has fallen out of favor quickly. I'm not sure what happened between last year and this year other than him getting hurt.
Well, I think they understood that Trey Lance needed a lot of work. And the problem is he hasn't been able to get that work due to injury. So Trey Lance really hasn't played football since the year before the pandemic, which was 2019. That's a long time. So he's still a quarterback that needs a lot of work. And this is a really good football team. So they're in Brock Purdy obviously came in last year and executed that offense at a very, very high level. I mean, this is a really well-schemed offense. It has a very good run game. That's still the foundation. They've got really good receivers. They've got a solid O-line. And we know about their defense. There are some changes there, but it still will be very, very good. So this is a team ready, as we saw a year ago. They're ready to contend. They're thinking Super Bowl. So at this point, I don't know if it's right to say they've soured on Trey Lance. It's just the fact that they still believe that Trey Lance is a quarterback that needs work and that he's a work in progress. And this is not a work in progress roster, Ross. So, it comes across in a very negative way. And we don't know if that's fair or not. But the fact is, if Brock Purdy is healthy and ready to play, he's going to be the quarterback.
It's interesting, isn't it? Different situations, they change the circumstances, because that makes sense to me. The way you just laid it out, like maybe they still think Trey Lance can be good. Maybe that's why they didn't just give him away for anything, but he just hasn't had a chance to really prove it. I will say this, with all the Dalvin Cook stuff and all the running back stuff this offseason, Greg, and, there's always some people that analytically will tell you running backs don't matter. Greg, you cannot tell me when the 49ers got Christian McCaffrey that he does not make a difference in the outcome of games. You cannot tell me that player does not make a difference.
And I agree with that, and then the flip side of that people would say, hey, they had a good offense when Jeff Wilson was running the ball or Mostert was running the ball. You can have that debate forever. They're a team that obviously starts foundationally with the run game. McCaffrey is also an outstanding receiver. When you put on their tape from a year ago, you see McCaffrey often split out. Not every back in the league can do that and do it effectively. I mean, that's one reason why the Lions drafted Jahmyr Gibbs with the 12th pick in the draft, because those kinds of players are weapons more than running backs. Yes, they're obviously running backs by position, but they're offensive weapons. McCaffrey is an offensive weapon, not simply someone you line up behind the quarterback. And I think that really enhances the options in their offense and makes them far more difficult to defend.
I don't know why Deebo Samuel keeps saying he had such a bad year. I didn't notice that. I don't know. Maybe he's just motivating himself. I thought he looked like he always does.
Yeah, no, I mean, and Brandon Ayuk, he's another player. I think he's really been developing each and every season. He's a really good route runner. He's really good run after catch. He fits this offense exceptionally well because he runs those in-breaking routes, which are a staple of the 49ers offense under Kyle Shanahan. And this is a really good offense. Now, there'll be a couple of changes, not too many. I shouldn't say that, only at right tackle because McGlinchey's gone. So there'll be one change on the offensive line. It's a solid group. And as I said, we know about the defense. And I was watching a little bit of the Eagles defense last week, and they signed Javon Hargrave, who obviously was with the Eagles a year ago. And man, as you know, Ross, Hargrave played exceptionally well for the Eagles a year ago. That's a really good signing for them.
Yeah, and it's kind of a double whammy, right? I mean, they make their defense better, and they take away one of the best players from probably their primary competitor in the NFC.
Yeah, and of course they have Fred Warner, who's, in my mind, without question, the best linebacker in football.
Why do you say that?
He's long, he's athletic, he can do everything. And then when you watch the tape, you see how he's deployed within the context of their defense. They use him in multiple ways. He's a multi-dimensional player, but he is a terrific linebacker. To me, there's not a question that he's the best.
So two other thoughts on them that I think are interesting, Greg. Number one, they had to get Hargrave because Kinlaw just did not become what they were hoping he would. Kinlaw was taken for some rides in that NFC Championship game. Yeah. And I think they realized they needed to get better at D tackle. What are your thoughts on their secondary, Greg, when you look at Lenore, Hufanga, Tyshawn Gibson, Trevarius Ward?
Well, Hufanga became a really solid player last year, and they had a great feel, and obviously that was D'Amico Ryans, but Steve Wilkes is someone who I think is really good as well. He's the new DC there. Hufanga was really used effectively. He's better closer to the line of scrimmage. He was a really effective player in that way. They got phenomenal play from Gibson, who's been a veteran player, has had some good years in this league. He's one of those guys that understands. He sees it. He can play on the back end very effectively. Ward at one corner, very, very solid. I thought Lenore ended up playing really solid football as the year progressed. Now, they lost Kawan Williams in the slot. They signed Isaiah Oliver, who at one point was a second-round pick, I believe, of the Falcons, and they see him now as their slot. He's a different kind of player. He's bigger. Williams was small. Oliver is about 6'2", over 200 pounds. So that's a different kind of slot. So we'll see how all that plays out, if that impacts how they play defense. But, they're a really good group. I think they're a solid group in the secondary. Ward's been a good player in this league. He was good in Kansas City, and he was good a year ago in San Francisco.
You know what else is good? Labatt Blue Lights. Drinking those with your friends. Hopefully everybody's been doing that this week with the 4th of July week. Drink some Labatt Blue Lights with your friends and live life to the power of we. Always enjoy responsibly beer. Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. All right, Greg, let's take a look now at the Seattle Seahawks. Maybe one of the surprise teams a year ago. And then because of that Russell Wilson trade, they had some draft capital, They get Jackson Smith and Jigba on offense. They get Devin Witherspoon on defense. They also made some moves in free agency for a guy like Draymond Jones, and they brought Bobby Wagner back. Let's start on offense, Greg, but the moves the Seahawks made this year, I think that they're a sneaky pick to go to the Super Bowl from the NFC. I mean, they were pretty good last year. It feels like they've upgraded a lot of spots. I guess the biggest question, obviously, is do we believe that Geno Smith can more or less play that well again?
Well, to me, the biggest question for this team is what their predominant personnel grouping is going to be on offense. Last year, they were about 40% playing with multiple tight ends, Ross. They played with 2 and 3 tight ends. I think they had the second highest percentage in the league. They were certainly in the top 3 in the league percentage-wise when it came to playing with 2 and 3 tight ends. They drafted Jackson Smith-Njigba with the 20th pick in the draft. And I really like this kid coming out of Ohio State. So now you've got Metcalf, Lockett, and Smith-Njigba. But they also drafted Zach Charbonneau in the second round. And we know Kenneth Walker, when healthy a year ago, looked really, really good. So, I mean, someone can say, oh, gee, it's an embarrassment of riches, but they have to figure out, how they see this, and it all becomes, first you start foundationally, how do you want to go about your offseason structuring this? And then it becomes game and opponent specific as you play specific opponents in the course of the season. But I think this is a fascinating dilemma for them because it's easy to say, oh, they got Smith-Njigba, they're going to play 11 personnel. But on the other hand, they've always been a run-first team. Now, you can run out of 11 personnel. You don't have to have 2 or 3 tight ends on the field. But, I'm just curious to see how they see themselves offensively through this offseason into the season.
One thing we didn't talk about enough last year, Greg, that needs to be, they started 2 rookie offensive tackles.
Yes.
And they played pretty darn well, and they made the playoffs. I mean, I looked at Geno at quarterback, 2 rookie offensive tackles. I really thought they'd be one of the worst teams in the league last year, Greg. I really did.
Yeah, and I thought that, look, I thought Charles Cross played well. I thought as the year progressed, he struggled a little bit, but he's a good player and he'll probably get better. Don't forget, as you know, Ross, you come out of college, it's a long season in the NFL. I thought he had some one-on-one pass protection issues as the season progressed, but nothing where you went, oh my God, he can't play. And the other kid, Lucas from Washington State at right tackle, I thought he played very, very well. So this is a really interesting offensive team.
Defensively, I find them pretty interesting too, Greg.
Yep.
They bring back Jaron Reed, bring back Draymond Jones, and then the biggest one is bringing back Bobby Wagner.
Sure.
They still have Nwosu. Devin Witherspoon's a top 6 pick, and then they got to find a way to put Jamal Adams back in this thing. Although I don't know, man, with them signing Julian Love, I don't know what Jamal Adams' role is going to be.
Yeah, and the thing is that Clint Hurt, who's their D coordinator, has a bit of a Vic Fangio background. Now, everybody thinks Fangio, it's always quarters. That's the thing. Now, that's not necessarily true when you watch the tape, but they do start a lot with a quarter structure and then move to other things. I'm very curious to see how the other safety position plays out because Love was a safety with the Giants. Why did they sign him? And Love must have gotten some kind of assurance. I doubt Love signed there with them telling him, well, you're not going to play very much. So, I'm really curious because we know Diggs has probably played as high a percentage of post safety, meaning single high safety, as anybody in the league over the last couple of years. And I think that their defensive structure could change a little bit. But I love their draft picks on defense. Now, I can only make that judgment based on my evaluation of the players they chose. That's all I can do. Witherspoon's a really good prospect. I really like Derek Hall, who they got from Auburn in the second round. I think he's a really good edge pass rusher. And they got a kid out of Mississippi State named Cameron Young in the 4th round, who I think is going to end up getting meaningful snaps for them inside.
And they got Bobby Wagner back.
Yeah, and Bobby Wagner
playing well last year for the Rams.
Yeah, he played at a pretty high level. I mean, you talk to people at the Rams, he played at a pretty high level. I don't know when they'll get Jordan Brooks back because I think he tore his ACL, so I don't know what his timetable is, but he's a solid player as well.
Speaking of the Rams, Greg, I don't know really quite what to make of those guys. They still have Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp on offense, Aaron Donald on defense. I mean, they've got some high-level players, as you would say. But then there's question marks and there's inexperience, and they don't have quite the roster that they had the last couple years, and part of that's salary and part of that's injuries.
Yeah, and I think one of the big questions is their offensive line as you start this season. They drafted Steve Avila in the second round. I think he'll end up starting at left guard. But this offensive line at this moment in time is clearly a work in progress. And Stafford is certainly a pocket quarterback who needs to be well protected in order to function effectively. And he's about 35 years old now. He's battled some injuries later in his career, still obviously throws the ball exceptionally well. Even defensively, you look at this roster and there's a lot of unknowns on this roster on both sides of the ball. So right now, as we speak, as we get to early July, as it were, right now we're a little uncertain as to what this team can be, just because there's so many young players who are unknowns.
And they sort of they sent a letter to season ticket holders. They basically said, we kind of always knew this would happen at some point, like in terms of the roster.
Yeah, and I think they had to know that based on things they've done in the past with trades and getting rid of draft picks. It's really hard to replenish your roster when you don't have draft picks. So we'll see how all this plays out. But again, they knew this was coming. The key thing here is their O-line, because if their O-line can pass protect, I know that they feel that Matthew Stafford can still make plays and throw the football. And at least that gives them a chance to score.
Check him out on social media. He is the man at Greg Cosell. Next week, we'll dive into a new series as we get closer and closer. Believe it or not, the training camp's opening just a couple weeks away. Should be awesome. Thank you so much, Greg.
Thanks, Ross.
So good. I'm sad that series is over now. We got to come up with another good series. If any of you have any good ideas, hit me up on social media, email me, ross@rosstucker.com, or certainly the Tuckheads, the patrons, patreon.com/RTmedia. If you guys have ideas for a specific series for Greg for the next month before he's breaking down some of the preseason video, that would be awesome. You know what else would be awesome? If you played best ball on DraftKings. Specifically against me and Joe, but even if you don't do it against me and Joe, you can still get $10 million in guaranteed cash prizes that are up for grabs. So to start playing best ball, you download the DraftKings app using Ross, the code Ross. You enter the DraftKings Best Ball Millionaire Contest and snake draft your team for this season. If you're not familiar with best ball, and a lot of you might not be that into fantasy football. By far the best way to play fantasy football. You don't have to worry about setting your lineup each week or whether a guy's active or inactive or trades or the waiver wire. None of that. You just do the draft. And then all season long, whichever one of your guys scored the most points, well, then that was your running back or that was your wide receiver. It is awesome. By far my best and favorite way to play fantasy football. Head to DraftKings app, sign up with code Ross, start playing best ball today, join the DraftKings $10 million best ball tournament, and you'll get your first entry back in DraftKings dollars. Only on DraftKings with code Ross. Absolutely phenomenal. I love it. I also, Jack, love Greg. We got to talk. You and I got to talk, Jack, about what some of the other options are we could do with Greg. What do we have, probably 4 or 5 episodes until there's preseason games to break down? We could do cool, schematic stuff. We could do, he doesn't like lists, but we could still do, positional breakdown. There's a lot of options there.
Yeah, there's definitely some cool things we could do there. I think something that people brought up before, maybe some more behind the scene, like you mentioned, like game planning, kind of explaining defensive, offensive sort of formations, coverages, that sort of stuff. It could be something interesting. I'm not sure if people want to hear about or not.
Well, I definitely want to ask him, how can people get started? If they want to be like the next Greg Cosell, maybe next week we'll just get into how does somebody start learning how to watch football video. That'd be amazing. Have a great weekend, everybody. I think we're done here.
Thanks for listening to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also subscribe to the Fantasy Feast, Even Money, Business of Sports, and College Draft. All available at Apple Podcasts, rosstucker.com, or wherever podcasts can be found.
You know I got some shout-outs for you. MyFrontPageStory.com. There is no better gift you can get anybody for any reason. There just isn't. MyFrontPageStory.com. You could go, though, to BackOfficeScheduler.com, Evergreen Economics, Go-Bengals.com, SteakhouseSports.com, HumanHeadNYC.com, Sporticulture, and you definitely, if you're in Central Pennsylvania, should go to Pizza Boy Brewing.